In my soul, in my soul, in my soul, in my soul. I feel so alive. I feel so alive. I feel so alive. In my soul, in my soul, in my soul, in my soul. I feel so alive. I feel so alive. I feel so alive. In my soul, 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 in my soul. I feel so alive.
In today's episode, we will talk about the fear of failure and how it can feel immobilizing. Whether you're looking to become a new leader, expand your leadership skills, or just hear from diverse leaders who look, sound, and think like you, this podcast is for you. So sit up, get engaged, and let's get started. Hello, my lions and ducks, and thank you for listening in. If you're new to our podcast, this is our signature series show where my guests and I will discuss core leadership skills that will help you become a great leader. Each episode builds upon itself, so make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to get those notifications for new episodes. If you're a regular, thank you for your continued support. No matter how you choose to listen to us, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure that you review and rate us. Your support validates the work that we do here. Hello, friends. Our guest today, Susie Earhart, a certified customer experience professional and practice leader who is passionate about making experiences better, will be with us today to talk about the fear of failure. Today, we will discuss some tips, strategies, and things that can help you to overcome the fear of failure and gain self confidence, enabling you to reach your full potential. As we start off our first episode, I am so thankful to have Susie here with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Armando. Appreciate you making me your first guest. It's intimidating, a little fearful, but I'm excited to be here and we're going to have some fun today. I am just stepping out this year and doing podcasts and webinars and helping people who maybe don't know me personally to get to know me and my beliefs. And I appreciate the opportunity to help influence others the way that we've built a great relationship influencing each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so thankful that you are stepping outside of that comfort zone, joining in. And I know that what you're going to share with our listeners today is going to be so powerful and impactful. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about more about Susie and why you chose to be here today?
I've always had this passion throughout my career of getting to know people, and whether it's from a personal or professional standpoint, we just all have so much in us that there's just such a joy of seeing that flourish in another person. So when the opportunity came to talk about fear, which is something that I wrestle with throughout my whole life, it I felt that it was a great opportunity for me to share a little bit of my wisdom and hope that it becomes wisdom for you and helps you realize that a lot of times we're not alone in these fears, and there's a lot of great resources out there to help us.
That's right. When we talked about doing this episode, I shared with you the reason why this topic was so special to me, specifically because of a situation I had with a prior employer. You'll learn more about that. Stay tuned for episode 4, Bad Boss. I go into toxic relationships, how you can recover from those, and how you can deal with those in real time. But ultimately, that trauma. It created this fear of failure for me. So when I started working with Susie, it felt very much like quicksand, and it made me feel immobilized. Like I just couldn't. I was too afraid to do something, say something wrong. So to me, in my mind, it was better to not do or say anything at all, not take any action at all, and that's where the immobilizing part comes from. Like you just it gets overwhelming. That feeling of fear. What are people going to think of me? what's the impression? I don't want to fail. Your self-esteem, your confidence is at its lowest. And it was you, Susie, that just like yanked me and pulled me out of that. And it was just so special. I think back to it now and I just remember I'm in tears and I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. I don't know if I can succeed. I feel like I'm failing in life. I feel like I can't do this. And so I'm thinking about how important it was for me to have that support system. And I'd love for you to be able to share with our audience a little bit about how you supported me through that.
I think one of the things that was so important to me is that when an individual is new to a relationship, new to a job, new to an environment, we do walk in with that unknown, right? And because it's unknown, we take, as you mentioned, Armando, the past with us, and we try to assume that we're operating in a very similar environment of what we came from. And so, where I believed I made a big difference for you was giving you the opportunity to ask questions, understand the environment and the norms and the lack thereof norms, and how it was the same or different from where you came from, allowing you the ability to then feel more confident about where you could make steps on tenuous ground and where your steps would be on firm ground, and then assess the risk or the reward of making those steps forward. So, therefore, a lot of this is about the idea of let me understand more about where I'm at, and then hear the reinforcement of, hey, that was good. That worked. Maybe this could be better. And we got into this conversation where you would ask for feedback, I would provide it. I would also offer it proactively so that it would give you that confidence again that you could move forward and be less fearful and do things that maybe were a little bit more risky.
Yeah. How did you create that safe space for me?
Well, I think you need to tell me how I created that safe space for you. What was it that I did? What was it that I did that made you feel safe?
I think it was the the way you the empathy that you approached it with through a lens that you said, I'm not looking at your story through my eyes. I'm looking at your story through your eyes. And I have empathy for the pain that you have. And you did all of that with these subtle, the three things that I love about is, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to take action? Or do you want me to suggest something? And you always gave me those 3 things when listening in. That was the biggest piece of the support that I absolutely, um, loved about that growing experience was I could always count on you to do one of those 3 things, and you always follow through on that. If I said, "Listen," you just listened. You didn't do anything else, and I think that was special. That meant a lot to me.
Armando, I think that's a great point. As both somebody who is experiencing fear, as well as somebody who is working with somebody who's in fear, that technique that you just mentioned, I think is so powerful. If you are comfortable to say, I just need somebody to listen to me, there's a lot of people who we have a style in which we want to talk through something. It's not that I need you to do anything. It's just I need to verbalize it. And I don't want to be seeming like the idiot talking to the wall. I want another human being to react to me. And therefore, this idea that when you engage with someone and asking them, can you support me either by just listening or support me by giving me a suggestion as to what I should do based on the circumstance? Or once you hear me, can you do an action for me? Whether you're making that request or whether you're the one who's receiving the fear and then offering those 3, it's just so powerful, and it gives the ability for the individual in the circumstance to own their own outcome. And to me, a lot of fear has to do with the fact that I am in ambiguity and I don't feel like I have control. So how do I own it? And that's a great way, that technique of interacting with someone, to come up with the right level of ownership. And I think the way that I was able to support you was simply to understand that I have walked through that same path before. And I spent the time trying to understand where your circumstances were that may or may not have been the same as mine, but I've started new jobs. I've been in new, relationships, trying to make friendships. One of the things that was the biggest challenge for me is when I realized my daughter was a junior in high school and she was going to be leaving soon. And I didn't have much of a social life. My life was a mother, right? So there's a whole fear associated with that transition of life. Therefore, my ability to support you was really about my ability to reflect inside of me in those moments where I was fearful of failure on the job, failure to have a support system, failure to accomplish the goals that I've dreamed of for years, right? Failure being a good mother to somebody who would not necessarily be in the house with me anymore. And therefore, I would take what I learned, decide how I could potentially apply that to somebody who is in that same situation, and then make sure as I listened for the cues that were similar, but also the cues were for different. And as they tell us in grade school, just treat others the way we wanted to be treated. And when I was in fear, I tried to provide you the same things that I wish somebody would do for me when I was in fear.
Wow, that is very insightful, and as you were talking, I'm thinking about, yep, she did. Yep, I see that. Oh, that makes sense. And I hope that it's connecting with our listeners today, and they're looking back and they're saying, yes, I can reach out to that person, or I can support somebody in that same way. So that's awesome. Did you have any other stories? I know that you have so much to share today. I want to give you an opportunity to share whatever stories you'd like to share about our topic today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I felt as if I was extremely lucky in that I started my career at AT&T, which was a company that did a lot of investment in leadership training. So before I had even turned probably 27 years old, I had been through Velasco and Covey and all these, disc profiles and Myers-Briggs profiles and change management theory and all this great stuff. And it was very intimidating as a young leader. I was in my 20s, managing individuals who were in their 50s. Some of them that actually worked for me on the org chart were working for the company before I was born. That was a very intimidating. And obviously, there was a great fear of failure on my part to not serve them well because we were generationally different and historically different. And my views of the company were extremely different than theirs. And so, one of the things that I've done to channel that fear is I realized how difficult it is to make that leap from being an individual contributor to a leader. Many of us associate leadership only with having people report to us, but leadership comes in so many different forms. And so, one of the ways for me to tackle leadership was to actually bring forward many of those learnings that I was blessed with in my early career and help create programs for others, whether it's one on one mentoring, like what we have done together, Armando, or whether it's my work with the National Technology Council in their Emerging Leaders in Technology program, where we created a curriculum to help individuals who were tech savvy learn to be leader savvy. And we taught them things like how you get to know yourself better, how you understand what you need, and how you communicate. We taught them things about how to run a team and set goals and objectives and give feedback. I share that with you to say I truly have this passion about the way to work through fear is to take what you've learned before and apply it to new environments, and also to let others who have learned those steps before and apply it to your environment. So, the worst thing you can do in a state of fear is isolate yourself. Don't isolate yourself. Acknowledge that you have the fear and then find ways to start to move through it.
That's right, and that's a beautiful segment into the strategies that we want to share with our listeners today. So, thank you for sharing that story. I know that our listeners will value and appreciate this moment. So now let's talk about some three simple strategies our listeners can use to overcome their fear of failure. The first one is reframe failure as an opportunity for growth. I think that is so important that we look at it from a different perspective. The second one is practice self compassion and be kind to yourself. you are your worst critic, and you have to be kind to that. You have to allow yourself to grow. And the last one is to celebrate your wisdom and learnings. Now, before I we start this discussion, I give you an opportunity to share some more about those. I want to share a quick story about the celebrating your wisdoms and learnings. For those of you that are sports fans that just tuned in to the NBA playoffs and saw the Milwaukee Bucks lose, Giannis Antetokounmpo is their star player, and a reporter asked him if this whole season was a failure. And his response is exactly the type of leader that you should strive to be. He very calmly and professionally explained that leadership is more than um, eh, fails and successes. As he led his team through the playoffs, there was no fail. There was only successes, and there's steps to each of those, and then there's learnings along the way. And each time you take that wisdom, you reapply it the next time with the hope of winning a championship. The way that translates for you is the hope of making that success. So I just wanted to start with that one because that one's at top of mind for me because I thought that was very powerful. As a leader, you should be striving to understand that, helping your team understand that, and helping our future children understand that uh, your wisdoms and learnings go so much further than victories in the shortcoming. So, Susie, did you want to share anything else about any of these other three strategies?
Yeah. No, actually, I love your Milwaukee Bucks story because I mean they were the champions, right? And everybody had set the goal that you should go back and repeat. And one of the things I think is powerful about what he said is sometimes what we deem as success is the wrong success criteria. Therefore, winning the championship might not have truly been the success. Therefore, this reporter classified it as failure, but the success might be is that that team, like I think about, there was a Houston Astros team several years ago who won, who was a bunch of quote average players. There was no star, right? And the success, even though they ended up winning the World Series, was the fact that they came together as a team. So sometimes the failure is not the fact that you failed, it's that you defined the wrong success criteria.
That's awesome. And when we talk about reframing failure, I know a lot of times the people I think the misconception there is that people look at it as a negative thing, like, "Oh, I failed," or "Oh, I didn't do this. I didn't succeed in something." And if you look at it from a different lens, and one thing that I talked about with you before we did this show was using the analogy of video games. And we both kind of laughed because we came from the same generation of like when we grew up playing these video games, they were tough, man. Like there was no save, there was no like, you had to beat the game from the very beginning to the very end. And so some of us we got really good at that, and we were able to maybe conquer that level in 2 or 3 tries, while others it took 6 or 7 tries. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we didn't fail. We learned along the way. We took that wisdom, we took that learning, we reapplied it to the next life. Now, the difference is that we don't have multiple lives like a cat has 9 lives. We don't have a respawn in real life, but you still have that opportunity to do the same, to say, okay, what did I learn from that? This was a growing opportunity. And that's where the patience and self-confidence comes into being kind with yourself and saying, not beating yourself up and saying to yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? And how can I apply that to the next opportunity that I have?
Absolutely. We may not respawn, but we do reinvent.
I love that. So now we're talking about practicing self compassion and being kind to yourself. I think it's really important to recognize that because in my moment when I was facing fear and you were working with me, that was really hard for me. I was my worst critic, and it was extremely difficult for me to separate my failure with all I could see was not being successful. I couldn't separate that the wisdom and the learning that I'm and the growing that I'm doing, and so I kept on beating myself up like I can't do this, I won't do this. All these negative thoughts came into my mind. Could you share with our listeners, maybe if you can recall me in that moment, and maybe some things that you might have done or said that might have pulled me out of that to be more self-compassionate for myself?
I'll throw a couple, but I'm going to make you reflect back at what you did too, because a lot of this was your taking your leadership for and grabbing it for yourself. Um, One of the things that I believe that we did together successfully to help you be more self compassionate was to put the context around the fact that this is a new job, this is a new group of people, this is a new set of expectations. And as you said, we can be very harsh judges on ourselves and what we expect from ourselves. Yet, when we don't really know everything about the playing field, back to a sports analogy, when you don't know all the rules, it's easy to violate the rules, right? So, learning the rules can help give each of us a better understanding of what is considered failure within the environment as opposed to the self judgment of what is considered failure. I think another thing that we talked about quite a bit is why would we classify something as failure, right? To your point, it wasn't just about learning, it was also about why do we immediately go to the assumption that if I didn't do this, it's a failure? And so I'd ask you, Armando, to think back about, you mentioned the term self compassion, right? What is it that you would do to be kind to yourself when you did think you'd make a mistake? Where were some of those actions or some of those thoughts that you could insert back in that was like, okay, maybe I'm not as much of a failure as I'm trying to make myself out to be?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a reality check as well for me, that I was coming into an industry that was new to me. I was utilizing tools in a new way, specifically PowerPoint. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, that we've all used PowerPoint to some degree. In the way that that we were using PowerPoint was in such a graphic designer lens to ensure that we were captivating our audience, our stakeholders, visually. And that was a new concept for me. So I think it was having the reality of that, understanding that the things that I'm doing are new. What was difficult for me is that in the past, I had new experiences that I had conquered fairly quickly. So I set this expectation, this bar for myself. And when I couldn't hit this bar in that same light and that same expectation, all of a sudden I failed. Right. And so having the self compassion really came back to quick wins. Um, as oddly as it may sound, what helped me to be kind to myself was to find the quick wins and celebrate them. To be able to say, "Okay, I did this and I got 1 slide out of 10 right, but at least I got this 1 slide right," right? And, um, and I think that's really important for listeners, that are tuning in and they're trying to figure out, "How do I accomplish what I need to?" And sometimes we have to micromanage it. Sometimes we have to set realistic expectations. We've all heard of SMART goals, all of these things that help us to center ourselves so that we can find those quick wins, so that we can practice self-compassion, and in that moment in real time celebrate those victories.
I like that. So, self compassion is about finding quick wins. Self compassion is about letting yourself have permission to fail. Self compassion is part of that reframing that you said as well. And I think self compassion is also just the fact that we all fail, right? I mean, the beauty of humanity is that we're imperfect and we all strive for that perfection. And I think the way I've dealt with my fears of failure really is to say, we are going to fail. If we fail, that's to be expected. It's not the failure, it's what you do with the failure.
That reminds me of a beautiful story that I once heard somebody share about failing. And the problem is that as a young age, we're set with this expectation to fear things, right? We have to fear something for our safety. And taking, for example, as a child, you should fear the cars on the road because you don't want to get ran over. So your parents teach you don't run into traffic, right? Fear it. It's for your safety. Well, what ends up happening subconsciously is fears turn into these immobilized actions, these things that we don't do because we're so afraid. It keeps us safe, and what we should do is embrace it and recognize that it's part of life. It's part of what we go through. And instead of being afraid to jump into traffic and cross that street, teach ourselves a moment to pause, look both ways, make sure it's clear, then cross the street. And so when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. And so I wanted to share that with our listeners because I don't know whether you've heard the same story or not, but I think that's something to kind of think about, is that the next time you're parenting or the next time you're going through something, remember that if we reframe it and instead of saying do this for your safety, let's take a moment to think about what we can do differently. So now that we've gone over the strategies that you can use, Susie, would you share with our listeners three actionable steps that they can do today to help overcome the fear of failure?
I'd be happy to. When I think about fear of failure, there's typically three things that I think about that can help you move forward. One is acknowledging that fear and understanding it. The second is being patient with yourself and allowing others to help you through the process. And then the last one is actually just straight walking through it, tackling that fear and going through. So, with that, let me talk a little bit about each one of those and have you help me through that process. You had mentioned earlier, Armando, the word wisdom. The emotion of fear can lead you two places. It can either lead you to wisdom, which I so appreciate you allowed me to bring my wisdom from my walks through fear to our relationship. But fear can also lead you to anxiety and ultimately sometimes anger. And so if we don't acknowledge the fact that we're in fear, what happens is what you said is we start to get frozen and we get that anxiety. And then I know some who become so afraid that they're just angry that they can't change it and they don't realize that there's a way to move through it. And so fear is such a powerful emotion. And as somebody who's spent many years in corporate America, I will say many managers use fear as a tactic. If you don't do this, you'll lose your job. If you don't do that, well, you won't get a bonus. If, whatever the if, fear has done that. And sadly, it's very easy from a leadership perspective within a company to use fear as a technique to incent people to do a different behavior. You're not meeting your metrics, you know, you won't qualify for a bonus, or you won't be considered for that raise, or you won't be considered for the next promotion, or whatever it may be. And so, again, I come back to acknowledging fear and what it is that's driving that fear inside of you. And so when was it immediate that you recognized that your fear of failing in the new career was because of the history, or was there an evolution that got you to that thinking that suddenly realized, oh, I'm bringing my past into my present?
It was immediate for me because of my particular situation. It was so sudden and unexpected, and the things that were being told to me left a scar and trauma with me that I just couldn't shake. So immediately, no matter what I was going to do, it could be even sports. I'm an ex-athlete. I had played college basketball, and I thought to myself, I can surely get back on the court and play with the young guys again. And even that was very challenging for me. Even doing things that I was very strong at and previously became a challenge because mentally, um, I was afraid. I was told I believed, and I think that's the important thing, is that anybody can tell you something, but if you once you start to believe it, it starts to take over, and that fear of failure just immediately happened. I was frozen. I didn't want to. I didn't want that same. I didn't want to be told that again. I didn't want to hear that again. And now I look back at it, and it's like, well, I wasn't broken. It was, to your point. There's toxic relationships, toxic people, people that thrive on seeing other people's misery, and you can't control that. And, so I look at it now, realizing that I was in more control of it than I was. But it's tough for the listeners that are listening in right now, and they're dealing with the fear. I know exactly how you feel. It is very tough. It is frightening just to even think about it. And you get that as you mentioned, you get that anxiety, you get that anger, it starts to bleed over into different, aspects of your life, affecting relationships. Um, that's why these strategies are so important, and that's why taking the action to acknowledge that is even more powerful.
Absolutely. I do believe you are one of the lucky ones, and I know many of our listeners are too, who can see that the fear comes from something that just happened immediately. For me, it took me many decades to recognize that some of the fears that I had were because when I was young, I was the first grandchild, and I was expected to always have good grades and always be good in school and this high standard. And so I carried that through my career to the point where I was afraid to show up with my strategic plan because I was afraid it wasn't going to be perfect. I wanted to score 100 on it. And if I showed up with the plan and then I modified it 3 months in, once I learned new information, I thought that was a failure. And so, again, fear can be something that just happened, or it can be something that's embedded way back from your childhood. um, Luckily, I realized I'm no longer afraid to throw because I was told I throw like a girl. Well, I'm a girl, so so now I so now I can throw and I can totally miss and we can laugh about it. But I didn't play sports for a long time because I was told what a bad sports player I was, and I was afraid to embarrass myself in front of folks. So, we'll play horse, you'll win, and everything will be okay because I've worked through that failure and where it came from for so many years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing to have two very opposite stories there, just because I can certainly understand and sympathize that the scarring that you carried with you through your entire life, having this expectation. I have a different experience where I didn't have much expectation. My family unfortunately, didn't believe too strongly about where I was headed in life, and a lot of it was on my own doing. Right, I was young and I was living adventurously and reckless, and so I'm very happy that our listeners can hear these two different stories and how fear can impact you immediately, or it can take time. It builds up, and it's not something that just, it's a different story for every person. Even if you're sitting here and you're like, "Oh, that story resonates with me." I'm sure your story has a little bit of a uniqueness to it because it's your story. And I think that's important. So thank you, Susie. I appreciate that. Any other actionable steps that you want to share with us?
Yeah. The next actionable step we should dig in just a little bit more is the be patient with yourself and ask for help, right? What you just mentioned, sometimes you see where the fear comes immediately. Sometimes it takes a long time to understand where it comes from. And that patience with yourself to live with that fear, understand that fear is really critical. If you try to push through it and quash it, it pops up later, kind of like one of those little games, where you whack a mole here, but then it pops up later in a different area. Give yourself the permission to work through it. Be patient with yourself as you face that fear. But especially as a leader, being transparent and being willing to ask for help, I think is so powerful. When I think about some of the things that I've done in my career and when I've worked with teams, you don't want to tell your team, hey, there's no way we're going to make this goal that we just set. We're just going to fall flat on our face. There's no possible way that development can get this done in time for us to make the release, right? But there is a way for you to say to the team, hey, there's a lot of risk in us putting this timeline together. I'm afraid that these risks could derail us. How could we work together to come up with other ideas to mitigate those risks? Or do we have other ideas that could come up with the same outcome but just come from a different path? I share that to say a lot of times asking for help doesn't mean to say, I'm afraid. It could be, here's what we're trying to do. How do we work on this together as a team? I think the other thing to think about when you're dealing with other people in fear is the example of understanding what you need from someone. Do you need from them just to listen to you? Do you need from them to take some action? Do you need from them to give a suggestion? Those different ways to help each other can be very powerful when you work through fear. The last thing I'll say about this topic about having others help you is I was one of those who was taught to take care of everyone around me. And for most of my life, I was always there helping other people through their situations, their problems, making things better. I felt, that quote, maternal instinct. And one day I suddenly realized that when I didn't ask for help, the joy that I receive in helping others, I was denying to the people around me who wanted to help me. And so asking for help actually is giving another person a gift for the chance for them to contribute to your success and be a part of your life. And again, whether it's the small thing of give me a new idea in a very ubiquitous way that they don't know you have fear, or whether it's the big thing of being able to be transparent and share your emotions. I think a lot of us forget that asking for help is actually giving another person a gift that we love to receive and we love to be able to help them through. You're just reciprocating that.
That's beautiful. That's I think about when you were sharing that, I think about pay it forward and how important that is. And and so you're allowing those to do that, to pay it forward. And I think that's pretty special. So our listeners have some strategies, they have some action items. They're probably feeling like, oh my gosh, there's so much to do, so many steps. Can you kind of put the third one into a conclusion here with that third action item, uh, how they can walk through that?
Yeah, well, let's be honest. It could be as many steps or as few steps as we want. There's sometimes we just have to stand in the diving board and jump in the 8-foot pool, right? We have to quote sign that paper or quit that job or tell somebody I won't listen to this anymore. I'm not going to let you treat me like that. Sometimes it's just one big step, and other times, like you've described earlier, it's coming up with a lot of little wins to get that self-confidence back and to shove that fear back into that closet and make it go away so the monsters stay under the bed. But the thing is, you just can't, well, say relish in it. And relish is, typically a positive word, but, fear can be all consuming. And literally, the last thing is just take a step, right? Whether it's big or small, just take a step. And once you move a little bit, you'll find a different, I'll say, reaction to the fear. And then you just take another step if that one wasn't big enough and just keep moving. What is it? There's nothing to fear but fear itself.
That's right. And I love that just taking a step,
Just walk through it.
just walk through it. I love that. I think that's really important for our listeners. If there's one thing that you do today that you take away from listening to this, please, please, please just take a step. It doesn't matter where that step is headed. Just take a step, and what you'll do is you'll find rhythm and you'll find momentum, and that will help you to overcome the fear of failure. So I wanted to bring it all together by saying fear of failure can be a major obstacle to achieve your goals and realizing your dreams. And the beautiful thing is we do have strategies, and we've shared with you today a few that will help you overcome that fear, help you build some confidence in yourself and your abilities. Some of those strategies include reframing the failure, the opportunity to look at things a little bit differently, practicing self compassion, celebrating your wisdoms, and then taking some action, acknowledging the fear, being patient with yourself, allowing others to help, that pay it forward, and then walking through it, making the steps as big or as small as you need to be able to get through that, are all very important things. So thank you, Susie, for joining us today. I know that our listeners have gained some very valuable insights. Any final thoughts?
Oh, Amanda, well, thank you for the opportunity to do this with you. You have made it a very easy environment to have a dialogue. A lot of my fear was mitigated quickly. Thank you. Yeah, no, other than that, I think my only final thought is it hits all of us, it hits from many directions, and you're not alone.
That's beautiful. So, what is coming up for you? Where can listeners find you? What is new and upcoming for Susie? Where they can find you maybe on LinkedIn? How can they interact with you so that if they need somebody to listen, somebody to take some action, or somebody to just make a suggestion? Um, what's going on in Susie's life coming up?
So if they want to find me, it's pretty much on LinkedIn. I am not a believer in all of the other social media places because, from my perspective, they put too much fear into my life, and I love living life, and I love the interactions and the one-on-one, and less of the posts and all the other things that come through in social media. So find me on LinkedIn. For me, some things are coming up. If you're in the Nashville area in technology, I'm a big part of the Nashville Technology Council's elite program, Emerging Leaders in Technology. We're looking for our new 2023 cohort right now. In addition to that, I'm helping people advance their customer experience skills. We literally are announcing now the launch of the Customer Experience Masters Academy. Visit us on cxmastersacademy.com, and that is with an S, no apostrophe, cxmastersacademy.com. We are launching courses so that if you want to become more understanding about how to interact better with your customers, with your suppliers, with your coworkers. And some of this stuff leads to empathy that can translate into your own human life. Check us out. We have online courses. We'll be adding more throughout the year. And that's been a new adventure for me into a new realm of fascination and interest. And now I'm also working on just new ideas of being more open to mentoring in change management, understanding more about customer experience, and expanding as a new resident in Denver, my understanding of sustainability. So that's what's on the plate for me.
Awesome. Well, I'm very, very grateful to have you join us today. Just also keep in mind that everyone experiences setbacks. We all make mistakes from time to time. We're not perfect, as Susie said. The key is to allow yourself that emotional space to face those fears and just keep moving forward. With the right mindset and strategies in place, you can overcome your fear of failure and achieve great things. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you enjoyed the content, remember to subscribe to receive notifications for our upcoming episodes. Also, don't forget to join my free membership. You're going to want to go to thelionandtheduck.com. You'll get exclusive blog content, podcast content, and also online learning. I've got Sales 101 up right now for you. Remember, be bold, be compassionate, be authentic. Lions keep on roaring, ducks keep on paddling. Have a good one.
I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle with a